The recruitment station on Nexus Prime buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy gathered for the most prestigious military selection in known space. The Galactic Defense Coalition needed only the finest warriors for their elite strike force, and creatures from 100 different worlds had come to prove their worth. Commander Zexatar, a towering Krathari with obsidian scales and 4 powerful arms, surveyed the candidates with his predatory yellow eyes. His species had dominated galactic warfare for 3 centuries, their natural armor and incredible strength making them nearly unstoppable in combat. Beside him stood Captain Velnora, a sleek Sith whose species could move faster than most eyes could follow, her silver skin gleaming under the station's harsh lights. The testing ground stretched across several acres, filled with obstacle courses, combat simulators, and strength-testing equipment designed to push even the most formidable warriors to their limits. Candidates lined up in groups based on their species classification, each group representing the pinnacle of their world's military might. The Draknari contingent stood in perfect formation, their reptilian forms radiating confidence. These 7-foot-tall warriors were known throughout the galaxy for their tactical brilliance and unbreakable battle discipline. Their leader, War Prime Ket-Ak, had never lost a single engagement in 40 years of service. Near them, the insectoid Vexani clustered together, their chitinous exoskeletons clicking softly as they communicated in rapid chemical bursts. Each Vexani possessed the strength of 10 normal humanoids and could survive in the vacuum of space for hours. Their hive-mind coordination made them devastating in group combat. The crystalline Zephyrians stood like living gemstones, their bodies refracting the light into dazzling displays. They could manipulate energy fields and had skin harder than most metals. No projectile weapon had ever successfully penetrated Zephyrian armor. At the far end of the formation, looking completely out of place, stood a single human. Marcus Chen had arrived on a transport from Earth just hours earlier. He was average height for his species, around 6 feet tall, with dark hair and brown eyes. Unlike the other candidates who wore ceremonial armor or displayed natural weapons, Marcus stood in simple military fatigues, carrying only a standard-issue rifle and basic equipment pack. The moment other candidates noticed him, the whispers began. "Is that a human?" hissed a Draknari soldier, his forked tongue flicking out in amusement. "Must be some kind of mistake," clicked a Vexani warrior, its compound eyes reflecting disbelief. Commander Zextar noticed the commotion and approached Marcus with heavy, deliberate steps. His massive frame cast a shadow over the human, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You there, human? This is a selection for elite warriors, not a tourist exhibition. The civilian transport bay is in Sector 7. Marcus looked up at the towering Krathari without flinching. "I'm here for the selection, sir. Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Corps." The silence that followed was broken by harsh laughter from the assembled candidates. Even some of the testing officials began to chuckle. The idea of a human competing alongside the galaxy's most feared warriors was absurd to them. "Human," Zextar said, his tone condescending. "Your species barely qualifies as sentient. You have no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no special abilities. Your bones are fragile calcium composites, your skin tears at the slightest provocation, and your reflexes are slower than most prey species. What could you possibly offer to an elite military unit?" Marcus remained calm, his voice steady. "I'd like the chance to show you, sir." This provoked another wave of laughter. War Prime Ket-Ak stepped forward, his scales rippling with amusement. "Commander, perhaps we should allow this entertainment. It might serve as a good warm-up exercise for the real candidates." Captain Velnora, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke up. "There are regulations about species discrimination in coalition recruitment." "Of course," Zextar replied with a predatory grin. We wouldn't want to deny any being their right to humiliate themselves. Very well, human. You may participate. Try not to die during the preliminary tests. The first challenge was a basic physical assessment. Candidates were required to complete an obstacle course designed to test strength, speed, and agility. The course included climbing walls, carrying heavy objects, and navigating through laser-defended corridors. The Draknari went first, their powerful legs propelling them over walls with ease. Their natural strength allowed them to carry the weighted objects as if they were empty containers. War Prime Ketak completed the course in under 3 minutes, setting a new station record. The Vexani moved through the course like liquid, their insectoid bodies perfectly adapted for crawling through tight spaces. Their coordination was flawless, and they completed the course in impressive time. The Zephyrians simply phased through many of the obstacles, their crystalline forms allowing them to briefly become intangible. The energy barriers meant to slow candidates barely affected them. When Marcus's turn came, the crowd of candidates gathered to watch what they expected to be a spectacular failure. The human approached the first obstacle, a 30-foot climbing wall with minimal handholds. Unlike the other species who had bounded up the wall using natural strength or abilities, Marcus took his time. He studied the wall for several seconds, then began to climb using a technique none of the observers had seen before. Instead of powering through, he moved efficiently, using momentum and balance to conserve energy. His movements seemed almost dance-like as he flowed from one handhold to the next. He reached the top in reasonable time, though not as quickly as the others. The watching aliens began to murmur with grudging interest rather than outright mockery. The second obstacle required carrying a 1,000-pound weight across a 100-yard distance. The other species had simply picked up the weight and walked, their enhanced physiology making the task manageable. Marcus approached the weight and immediately knew he couldn't simply lift it. Instead, he spent precious seconds examining the object and the terrain. Then he began to move it using leverage and rolling techniques, breaking the task into smaller, manageable portions. It took him longer, but he completed the challenge without injuring himself. The final obstacle was the laser corridor, where candidates had to navigate through a maze of deadly energy beams that would eliminate them if touched. The other species had used their natural speed or special abilities to blur through the corridor. Marcus entered the corridor slowly, studying the pattern of the lasers. Where others had relied on reflexes or powers, he used prediction and timing. He moved like water, flowing through spaces that existed for only fractions of a second. His progress was methodical but steady. When he emerged from the corridor unscathed, the laughter had completely stopped. Commander Zextar stared at the human with newfound interest. "Interesting," the Krathari commander rumbled. "You completed the course using methods none of us have seen before. But physical ability is only the beginning. Tomorrow we test combat skills." As the candidates dispersed to their quarters, Marcus noticed that the mocking glances had been replaced by curious stares. War Prime Ketak approached him as he gathered his gear. "Human," the Draknari said, his voice lacking its earlier condescension. "Your methods are unconventional. But tomorrow you face the combat trials. Cleverness will not help you when facing a true warrior in battle." Marcus shouldered his pack and looked directly into the reptilian warrior's eyes. "We'll see." That night, in the candidate quarters, discussions centered around the unexpected human. Many still believed he would be eliminated quickly in the combat trials, but a few began to wonder what other surprises he might have in store. In his sparse quarters, Marcus cleaned his equipment and reviewed intelligence files on his potential opponents. He had studied every species represented in the selection, learning their strengths, weaknesses, and fighting styles. Earth's military doctrine had always emphasized knowing your enemy, and Marcus had taken that lesson to heart. He understood that he couldn't match these beings in raw power or special abilities. But he also knew that every strength could become a weakness under the right circumstances. The key was understanding how to create those circumstances. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. Earth was still considered a minor world by galactic standards, its inhabitants viewed as weak and unremarkable. But Marcus carried with him the hopes of his entire species and a determination to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Tomorrow would bring the real test, and Marcus Chen was ready to show the galaxy what humans could accomplish when they refused to give up. The combat arena on Nexus Prime was a technological marvel, capable of simulating any battlefield condition imaginable. The massive circular chamber could generate environments ranging from asteroid fields to jungle planets, complete with real hazards and obstacles. Advanced holographic projectors created opponents that could actually harm participants, making every simulation a life-or-death struggle. Commander Zextar stood in the observation deck, surrounded by ranking officers from across the coalition. Today's combat trials would determine which candidates advanced to the final selection phase. The arena below buzzed with energy barriers and weapon stations as technicians prepared for the day's battles. The combat trials will consist of 3 phases, Zextar announced to the assembled candidates. Individual combat against simulated enemies, tactical team exercises, and finally, one-on-one duels between candidates. Only the strongest will advance. The candidates stood in their species groups, each radiating confidence in their own abilities. The Draknari contingent had spent the morning in meditation, focusing their warrior spirits. The Vexani had synchronized their chemical communications for perfect battlefield coordination. The Zephyrians had charged their crystalline bodies with energy until they glowed like small suns. Marcus stood alone at the human position, checking his weapons and equipment. His rifle was a standard Coalition-issue plasma weapon, nothing special compared to the exotic armaments carried by other species. His armor was basic protection plating, far inferior to the natural defenses of his competitors. The first phase began with each candidate facing waves of holographic enemies in different scenarios. The observers watched as each species demonstrated their natural advantages. The Draknari candidate, War Prime Ketak, faced a simulation of defending a space station against boarding pirates. His powerful claws tore through enemy armor like paper, and his tactical experience showed as he positioned himself to control choke points. The reptilian warrior moved with deadly precision, eliminating threats with brutal efficiency. A Vexani warrior faced a swarm scenario, fighting against hundreds of small, fast enemies. The insectoid's natural coordination and multi-limb combat style allowed it to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Its exoskeleton absorbed impacts that would have shattered other species, while its mandibles and claws created a whirlwind of destruction. The Zephyrian candidate entered a simulation filled with energy-based weapons and electromagnetic hazards. The crystalline being absorbed energy attacks and redirected them back at enemies, while its diamond-hard skin deflected projectiles harmlessly. It moved through the battlefield like a walking fortress of destruction. Then came Marcus's turn. The arena shifted to simulate an urban warfare scenario with narrow streets, multi-level buildings, and civilian areas that couldn't be damaged. The human-faced enemies, equipped with advanced weapons and armor, including several that had proven challenging for previous candidates. The watching aliens expected to see Marcus overwhelmed quickly. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented. Where other candidates had relied on superior firepower or natural abilities, Marcus used the environment itself as a weapon. He lured enemies into ambush positions, used debris and cover to redirect their attacks back at them, and turned their own weapons against them through careful positioning and timing. When a heavily armored opponent proved resistant to his plasma rifle, Marcus didn't try to overpower it. Instead, he led it into a position where a damaged support beam would collapse, crushing the enemy under tons of debris. When faced with multiple fast enemies, he used narrow corridors to force them into single-file attacks, negating their numerical advantage. Most impressive to the observers was how Marcus seemed to predict enemy movements before they happened. He would move out of the way of attacks that hadn't been fired yet, position himself to exploit weaknesses before they appeared, and set up chain reactions that eliminated multiple enemies with minimal effort. "How is he doing that?" Captain Velnora asked, her usual composure cracking slightly. Commander Zextar studied the human's performance with growing interest. "He's not reacting to their attacks. He's predicting them based on their positioning and behavior patterns. I've never seen tactical analysis performed at such speed." Marcus completed his simulation in record time, having eliminated all enemies while sustaining minimal damage and using less ammunition than any previous candidate. The arena fell silent as the implications became clear. The second phase involved team tactical exercises. Candidates were grouped randomly and given objectives that required coordination and strategy. Marcus found himself paired with a Draknari engineer, a Vexani scout, and a Zephyrian communications specialist. The mission was to infiltrate a heavily defended facility and retrieve sensitive data without triggering alarms. Most teams approached such scenarios with overwhelming force, using their natural abilities to smash through defenses. Marcus immediately took charge of planning, despite being the physically weakest member of the team. He studied the facility layout and guard patterns, then outlined a strategy that played to each team member's strengths while minimizing exposure to enemy forces. The Vexani's natural stealth abilities were used for reconnaissance and disabling security systems. The Zephyrian's energy manipulation talents were employed to create distractions and overload electronic defenses. The Draknari's strength was reserved for critical moments when brute force was actually needed. Marcus coordinated the entire operation, providing real-time tactical adjustments and predicting guard movements with uncanny accuracy. The team completed their mission without firing a single shot or triggering any alarms, achieving a perfect stealth score that had never been recorded in the arena's history. The other teams, despite their individual power, had relied on direct confrontation and superior abilities. They succeeded in their missions, but with far less finesse and much more collateral damage. During the break between phases, conversations among the candidates had shifted dramatically. The mocking comments had been replaced by respectful curiosity and, in some cases, genuine concern. "The human fights like no warrior I have ever encountered," War Prime Ketak confided to his fellow Draknari. "He does not rely on strength or speed, yet he achieves victory through methods we cannot fully understand." A Vexani cluster leader transmitted rapid chemical signals to its hive mates. "The individual human demonstrates tactical processing capabilities that rival our collective intelligence. This should not be possible for a single organic mind." The Zephyrian candidates communed through harmonic resonance, sharing their observations. "The human perceives patterns and possibilities that we miss, despite our enhanced sensory capabilities. There is something about their cognitive processes that differs fundamentally from ours." As the final phase approached, tension filled the arena. The one-on-one duels would pit candidates directly against each other, with winners advancing to the final selection. The matchups were determined by combat algorithms designed to create fair fights between different species. Marcus found himself scheduled to face War Prime Ketak in the opening duel. The Draknari warrior was considered one of the most formidable fighters in the galaxy, with decades of combat experience and natural advantages that seemed insurmountable. The arena configured itself for personal combat, creating a neutral environment with various weapons and obstacles available. Both combatants could choose any equipment from the arena's extensive armory. War Prime Ketak selected traditional Draknari weapons, plasma claws that extended from his natural talons and enhanced his already devastating close combat abilities. His scales were reinforced with energy shielding, making him nearly invulnerable to most attacks. Marcus chose equipment that puzzled the observers. Instead of the most powerful weapons available, he selected what appeared to be outdated and underpowered gear. His weapon choices seemed random, almost careless. "Is the human surrendering?" Commander Zextar wondered aloud. "Those weapons cannot penetrate Draknari shielding." Captain Velnora studied the human's selections more carefully. "I don't think so, sir. Every item he's chosen has a specific purpose. I just can't determine what his strategy might be." As the two warriors faced each other in the arena, the vast difference in their physical capabilities was obvious to everyone watching. War Prime Ketak stood 7 feet tall, his armored form radiating lethal power. Marcus looked fragile by comparison, his human physiology offering no apparent advantages. The signal to begin rang out across the arena, and War Prime Ketak charged forward with a roar that shook the observation deck. His plasma claws blazed with energy as he closed the distance to his human opponent in seconds. But Marcus was no longer where the Draknari had expected him to be. The battle that followed would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. What the observers witnessed challenged every assumption they held about warfare, strength, and the nature of victory itself. Marcus didn't fight War Prime Ketak directly. Instead, he fought the arena, the environment, and the Draknari's own expectations. Every move the human made seemed designed to frustrate and confuse his opponent, rather than cause direct damage. The weapons Marcus had selected weren't meant to penetrate Draknari armor. They were tools for manipulating the battlefield itself. He used them to create obstacles, redirect energy, and turn the arena's own systems against his opponent. War Prime Ketak found himself fighting shadows and echoes, never quite able to land a decisive blow against an enemy who seemed to always be one step ahead. The human's movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy while forcing the larger warrior to exhaust himself in futile charges. As the duel continued, something unprecedented happened. War Prime Ketak, the undefeated champion of countless battles, began to doubt himself. His attacks became more desperate, his movements less controlled. The psychological pressure of fighting an opponent who refused to be predictable was wearing down his legendary composure. The end came suddenly and unexpectedly. Marcus had maneuvered the increasingly frustrated Draknari into a position where the warrior's own reflected energy blast, combined with an arena obstacle that Marcus had subtly repositioned, created a feedback loop that overloaded Ketak's shielding. The proud Draknari warrior found himself flat on his back, his energy depleted, and his weapons offline, staring up at a human who had barely broken a sweat. The arena fell completely silent. Then, slowly, War Prime Ketak began to laugh. A deep, rumbling sound that grew into full-throated appreciation. "Magnificent," the Draknari said, as Marcus helped him to his feet. "I have been defeated not by superior strength, but by superior thinking. You have taught me that there are forms of combat I never imagined." The implications of what had just happened rippled through the observation deck and the assembled candidates. The human hadn't just won a single duel. He had demonstrated that the fundamental assumptions about warfare held by the galaxy's greatest military minds were incomplete. Commander Zextar found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about combat, strategy, and the potential of different species. The human had won not despite his limitations, but by transforming those limitations into advantages. As the remaining candidates prepared for their own duels, they did so with a new understanding. The galaxy's military doctrine was about to change forever, and it would all begin with a single human who had refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. News of Marcus's victory over War Prime Ketak spread through Nexus Prime like wildfire. Within hours, military personnel from across the station were requesting access to the combat recordings. The impossible had happened, and everyone wanted to understand how. In the elite officers' briefing room, Fleet Admiral Threxhan, the Coalition's supreme military commander, studied the battle footage for the 7th time. The ancient Krathari's massive form dwarfed even Commander Zextar, and his four arms moved in complex patterns as he manipulated holographic displays showing Marcus's combat techniques from multiple angles. "This changes everything," the Admiral rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military experience. "We have been thinking about warfare incorrectly for millennia." Beside him stood General Krixta of the Draknari High Command, her scales still bearing scars from the Void Wars. "Admiral, with respect, one human defeating one warrior does not invalidate our entire military doctrine." "Doesn't it?" Admiral Threxhan gestured to the holographic replay. "Watch again. The human never once relied on superior firepower, enhanced biology, or advanced technology. He used the one advantage we never considered because we never lacked it ourselves." "Which is?" General Krixta asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Adaptation born from necessity. Every other species in our coalition evolved natural advantages that made them formidable. Humans evolved with none of those advantages, which forced them to develop something we lost long ago: the ability to think beyond our limitations." The discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from the arena. The final phase of selection had taken an unexpected turn. After Marcus's victory over War Prime Kedak, several other candidates had challenged traditional combat approaches in their own duels. The psychological impact of seeing the impossible victory had liberated them from conventional thinking. Fights that should have been straightforward demonstrations of superior ability had become complex, tactical puzzles. But the most significant development was yet to come. Apex General Mordeth, supreme champion of the Zarathi Empire, had arrived at Nexus Prime. The Zarathi were the galaxy's most feared warrior race, their individuals standing 9 feet tall with natural armor that could deflect starship weaponry. Mordeth himself was a legend, having never lost a single combat engagement in over 2 centuries of warfare. He had come specifically to face the human. "I have heard of this unusual warrior," Mordeth announced to the assembled leadership, his voice like grinding stone. "The one who defeats enemies through methods that should not work. I challenge him to single combat." Commander Zextar attempted to explain that the selections were not meant for outside challenges, but Admiral Threxhan overruled him. The Coalition's leadership needed to understand the full implications of what they had witnessed. If Marcus could face the galaxy's greatest warrior and survive, it would prove that human tactics were more than lucky accidents. The arena was reconfigured for the ultimate challenge. Unlike the previous combat scenarios, this would be a pure test of warrior against warrior, with minimal environmental factors and access to the Coalition's most advanced weapons. Word of the challenge spread throughout the galaxy's military networks. Within hours, high-ranking officers from dozens of species had arrived to witness the confrontation. The arena's observation decks filled with the most powerful military minds in known space, all eager to see whether the humans' victory had been a fluke. Marcus spent the preparation time in meditation, clearing his mind and reviewing everything he knew about Zarathi combat doctrine. Unlike the previous challenges where he had time to study his opponents, this battle would require him to adapt in real time to an enemy whose capabilities far exceeded anything he had previously faced. Apex General Mordeth's preparation was very different. The massive Zarathi spent the time in ritualistic combat exercises, his movements shaking the station's bulkheads. His natural armor was supplemented with ceremonial war plate that had been blessed by the Zarathi war priests. His weapons were legendary artifacts that had slain thousands of enemies across the centuries. When the two warriors entered the arena, the contrast was even more dramatic than it had been with War Prime Ketak. Mordeth stood 9 feet tall, his obsidian armor reflecting the arena lights like a walking mountain of destruction. His primary weapon was a warhammer that required both hands to wield and could shatter reinforced barriers with a single blow. Marcus appeared almost childlike beside the massive Zarathi, his standard equipment looking inadequate against such overwhelming power. But the observers who had witnessed his previous victory watched with new understanding. They had learned that appearances could be deceiving when facing human tactical innovation. "Begin!" Admiral Threxhan commanded. Mordeth's opening attack was devastating in its simplicity. He charged forward with earth-shaking force, his warhammer sweeping in an arc that would have pulverized anything in its path. The attack was so powerful that it created shockwaves through the arena floor. Marcus wasn't there. The human had moved not to avoid the attack, but to position himself where the attack's aftermath would create opportunities. As Mordeth's momentum carried him forward, Marcus used the Zarathi's own weapon against him, deflecting the warhammer's path just enough to throw the giant off balance. What followed was unlike any battle the observers had ever seen. Marcus didn't try to match Mordeth's strength or endurance. Instead, he turned the Zarathi's advantages into disadvantages. The alien's massive size became a liability as Marcus forced him to fight in close quarters where the warhammer couldn't be used effectively. The Zarathi's armor, designed to absorb impacts, became a burden as Marcus led him through maneuvers that exhausted his stamina. Most remarkably, Marcus began to predict Mordeth's attacks with increasing accuracy. The Zarathi's centuries of combat experience created patterns and habits that the human learned to exploit. Every attack taught Marcus something new about his opponent's fighting style, allowing him to adapt his own tactics continuously. "Impossible," breathed General Krixta. "The human is learning faster than Mordeth can adapt. How is that possible?" Admiral Threxhan studied the battle intently. "Because the Zarathi relies on perfected techniques developed over centuries. The human has no perfected techniques to limit him. He can change his approach instantly because he has no ingrained habits to overcome." The battle raged for over an hour, far longer than anyone had expected. Mordeth had faced thousands of enemies, but never one who refused to fight according to established rules. Every time the Zarathi adapted to one of Marcus's tactics, the human would shift to something completely different. The end came when Marcus executed a maneuver that violated every principle of combat known to galactic military science. Instead of avoiding Mordeth's most powerful attack, he moved directly into it, using timing and positioning to redirect the Zarathi's own force back against him. Apex General Mordeth found himself pinned beneath his own warhammer, his armor locked in place by a combination of arena obstacles and his own weapon. For the first time in over 2 centuries, the supreme Zarathi warrior was defeated. But instead of humiliation, Mordeth's face showed wonder and respect. As Marcus helped free him from his predicament, the massive alien looked at the human with new understanding. "You do not fight like a warrior," Mordeth said slowly. "You fight like something new. Something we have never encountered before." "I fight like a human," Marcus replied simply. "We've had to learn different methods because we never had any other choice." The implications of the victory rippled outward from Nexus Prime like waves through subspace. Within days, every major military academy in the Coalition was requesting human instructors. Earth, previously considered a backwater planet, suddenly became the center of galactic military attention. But the changes went deeper than just tactical innovation. The victory had challenged fundamental assumptions about strength, power, and what it meant to be a warrior. Species that had relied on natural advantages for millennia began to question whether their approaches to conflict were incomplete. Marcus was immediately inducted into the Coalition's elite forces, but his role was unlike any previous position. He became the first director of adaptive combat doctrine, tasked with developing new training methods that incorporated human tactical flexibility with alien capabilities. The transformation of galactic military thinking began immediately. Traditional species-specific combat units were restructured to include human advisors who could provide alternative perspectives on battlefield problems. War games that had remained unchanged for centuries were redesigned to account for opponents who might not fight according to established patterns. Most significantly, the concept of impossible victory was eliminated from Coalition military doctrine. Marcus had proven that any enemy could be defeated if approached with sufficient creativity and adaptability. The psychological impact was enormous, as Coalition forces gained confidence in facing even overwhelming odds. Earth became a pilgrimage destination for warriors from across the galaxy, all seeking to understand human military methods. The planet's military academies, once ignored by the galactic community, became the most prestigious institutions in Coalition space. But perhaps the most important change was in how different species viewed each other. The strict hierarchy based on natural capabilities began to break down as commanders realized that every species might possess unique advantages that others had overlooked. Years later, historians would mark Marcus's victory over Apex General Mordeth as the beginning of the Coalition's golden age of military innovation. The techniques developed by studying human tactical methods would prove crucial in the great conflicts that followed, saving countless lives and ensuring Coalition victory against enemies who had seemed unstoppable. Marcus himself continued to serve with distinction, but his greatest legacy was not his personal achievements. It was the transformation of an entire galaxy's understanding of warfare, proving that intelligence, adaptability, and the refusal to accept limitations could triumph over any obstacle. The human who had once been dismissed as too weak and fragile had become the foundation upon which the galaxy's greatest military renaissance was built. And in military academies across known space, young warriors of every species learned the most important lesson Marcus had taught: that true strength comes not from what you are, but from how you choose to fight with what you have. The laughter that had once greeted human involvement in galactic warfare was replaced by reverent silence whenever Marcus's name was mentioned. The galaxy had learned that underestimating humans was the first step toward defeat, and that lesson would never be forgotten.